Hello again. This is a summary of sermon number 3 by Joseph Butler, entitled Upon Human Nature. And just like the last sermon, it starts with a Bible verse. It's the same Bible verse, in fact, Romans chapter 2, verse 14, which says, "For when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves." And he begins this sermon with an analogy. It's an analogy to a civil authority. He compares a political community to human nature. He says that just as a political authority, just as a civil authority has many parts, many diverse parts, which are all subordinated, if it's functioning properly, it's subordinated to one authority, and it will thrive insofar as that it is subordinated and led by one authority. So also our human nature has many parts, passions, appetites that need to be led by a single authority. And that is, for him, the superior faculty, or the conscience, which he says presides over them. He then compares us to animals again, or contrasts us to animals. If you remember in the last sermon, he says that uh, unlike animals that are just led by their passions, and in the illustration from the last sermon, an animal is even led by its passions into a trap. We would say that's still natural for the animal to do, but for a human being to do that, foreseeing the trap, and to still go ahead and pursue one's own pleasures, even in spite of that, harm done to oneself would be unnatural for a human to do. So he says what makes us different from animals is that we are a law unto ourselves, that we have this faculty that, called the conscience, that acts like a law unto ourselves, which approves or disapproves of our own action. Not only the actions of others does it tell us that, but it also tells us what actions of our own are right and what actions are wrong. So the question he considers next is a natural one, and that is, well, what obligations are we, this is paragraph number 5, what obligations are we under to attend and follow it? So why should I follow this faculty? Why should I follow my conscience? And his answer is straightforward and simple. He says that your obligation to obey this law is its being the law of your nature. So just the fact that it is the law of your nature is the obligation. The obligation is found there in the fact that it is part of your nature. So this shows that Joseph Butler is part of the natural law tradition. We've already seen that throughout these 3 sermons. He believes in a strong sense of design. He believes in a strong sense of teleology, or purpose in human nature. And so he says here that we have this conscience that tells us what to do, what we should or shouldn't do, and our obligation is found in its very being, in this very nature. So still, one might push back, and he considers this question in paragraph 6. Why can't I just ignore it? Why can't I just ignore when it tells me to do such and such, or refrain from doing such and such? And he says in response, that assumes that self-centeredness is actually going to lead you to happiness. That assumes that ignoring one's conscience and doing what you know you shouldn't do will lead you to a better place, will lead you to be happy. He says, and quote in paragraph number 8, he says, "Let it not be taken for granted that the temper of envy, rage, and resentment, which is what the conscience would tell you not to pursue, don't take it for granted that this yields greater delight than meekness, forgiveness, compassion, and goodwill, especially when it is acknowledged that rage, envy, resentment are in themselves mere misery, and the satisfaction arising from the indulgence of them is a little more than relief from that misery, whereas the temper of compassion and benevolence is itself delightful, and the indulgence of it by doing good affords new positive delight and enjoyment." So he just says that the assumption that ignoring your conscience would actually give you any sort of enjoyment is mistaken, and that there's more enjoyment to be found in following one's conscience, in following these passions, and being forgiving, being compassionate, and goodwill, than there is in denying it. He says it leads you, thinking of others actually leads you to peace and tranquility, and you have a better chance for that following your conscience, following the supreme authority rather than just following what you, some of your passions might lead you to do. So in sum, section 9 gives you a summary, and I believe this is a summary really of the last 3 sermons. He says that actions or passions are either natural or unnatural, suitable or unsuitable to your human nature, not based on how strong they are. Like different people might have different passions at different strengths, but they are suitable to your human nature if they don't violate your conscience or if they follow your conscience. So as long as your conscience approves of your actions, then those actions are natural. Those actions are in accord with the law of nature for you. And then he says finally, in fact, and he's repeated this several times throughout these sermons, and he'll continue to reiterate this, that attending to your conscience is actually compatible with self-love, that these two are not in conflict. Being concerned for yourself, your own good, and also being concerned for others. Those 2 things are compatible. And so he wraps up these 3 sermons with that line. I hope this has helped you to understand them.